So, in my previous video, I talked about the current passives and what I would do if I was a developer for a day. And the main purpose was to respond to a discussion I had in the Discord while also reaching out to players to get their thoughts on my ideas. Which were made in a day, just like that video. So not a whole lot of thought was put into it, and since that video, I've been in more and more discussions talking about the same topics. And I ran into the same problem of not being able to explain myself properly, so I've decided to make this video to get everything on the table and to make sure everyone understands. And honestly, I'm getting tired of talking about it. Getting killed by low-level air users spamming air blast and losing half my health to one bad read against an earth player is getting extremely stale. Which is very bad as the game has barely been out a month. So action needs to be taken, not more discussions. So I'm hoping after this video, a majority of players will agree on my opinions and maybe give a clear direction to developers on what the community wants. The main problem. Since my time enjoying the game, I've noticed a pattern of commonly talked about problems in the community, but majority of players all agree there is a lack of content, which I agree with and disagree with. Let me explain. The part I agree with is majority of the maps are disliked by a majority of the player base, which leads to players playing the same couple of maps over and over again, making the game feel repetitive and stale. For example, Space Rings and Octagon are unplayable for Earth users, which is currently the most popular element. And maps like Bridge and Shogun feeling small and cramped, and Drifters having another threat to worry about just overwhelms players, as they already have multiple people trying to kill them. This just leaves the playable map pool very small. I suggest getting community feedback for each map and adjusting them to meet players' needs rather than adding new ones. And the part I disagree with, new elements/attacks. This surprised me at first because personally I think there was a lot to learn and explore with new techs coming out every week. And with the game barely being out a month, there's no way people have already mastered all of the elements yet. So I did some interviews and some personal experiments of my own, and I found out the reason most players feel the need for new elements is because the ones we have now have become very bland to play and fight against, as most players have found the most optimal way to use them. The solution to this is simple. We need multiple competitive playstyles for each element, and the easiest way to achieve this is through passives. As of right now, the universal and element passives are very safe and boring, as they don't change gameplay much, and some are way stronger than others. So I recommend an entire overhaul to the passives to boost their powers greatly so that games are more action-packed, fast-paced, and diverse. But first things first, I would strongly recommend devs to add a new feature of heal on kill. I don't know the exact numbers, but something like heal for 25% of maximum health would encourage players to be more aggressive, which leads to more action within a round, and rewards players for improving and getting consistent kills. As too often I see players avoiding combat so that they preserve their health and stocks to maybe win the game, and this leads to a lot of frustration and overall boring gameplay. Also, I think it's already in the works, but damage passive should not be able to stack, as it leads to a lot of balance issues, except for one thing that I will get to later in the video. On to how I would rework the passives. First up, Vital Discipline. A strong passive, but pretty boring, only giving you 6 points of HP, and I don't feel any vitality once that extra health is gone. So I would add a new effect of passive healing so that players are more confident when taking fights, as they will be able to heal after. Also, it's a great passive for new players, as they will allow themselves to take more fights and make more mistakes. Overall, learning faster instead of being tempted to run and hide. Thickened Skin. Another passive aimed at newer players, as their movement will be lacking, so having the ability to soak up more hits is nice. But let's take it a step further, because once you're past the new player phase, this passive sees zero play. So let's buff it for newer players and give it more use for experienced players by adding the simple effect of extending the parry window slightly to help newer and older players become more efficient at parrying, as this becomes everyone's goal, not absorbing more hits. Fully Prepared. By itself, it's pretty weak, only giving you an ultimate at the start of the match, which you could miss and be without a passive for the entire round. And I see no point for two different ultimate passives, so I would merge Fully Prepared with Regenerative Charge, but nerf the effect so that it doesn't become oppressive, as the current version of Regenerative Charge is very strong, giving two ultimates a round consistently. and we're definitely not trying to deal with 3 per round. Fleet Dexterity, the only passive giving extra mobility, but you don't really feel more mobile. Why should air have all the fun with additional dash speed, as they are already the fastest? So let's spread the fun around and make this an option for all elements who are craving more mobility by adding 20% dash speed. Double-Edged, a theme passive giving you an insane damage buff coupled with a health trade-off, as an option for players who prefer the glass cannon type of playstyle, but currently, even though it's meant to be a double-edged sword, it seems one side is a lot sharper than the other, so I would increase the health trade-off so that you lose 5 points of HP instead of 4. And as I said earlier, damage passives should not stack, but make this passive the exception, as people who are craving high damage should be able to get it, but have to sacrifice something such as their health or mobility, making this passive cool and unique. Now currently I feel as though the rest of the universal passives are okay, so no need to make more problems by changing them, but we have a major issue with the element exclusive passives, as the goal for each one was to promote different playstyles, but they simply don't do that. Let's use Earth as an example. You have Aerial Obliterator and Stone Stance, both offering different effects, yet both are used for the same playstyle, which seems to be the only playstyle. As I said earlier, some major changes need to happen, and since I'm already talking about Earth, let's move on to Aerial Obliterator. Currently, it gives a 50% damage boost to Earth Walls, and that is the highest damage bonus in the game with no downsides. So it obviously needs some changes. And there have been a lot of debates about it, and after hearing their opinions, I feel the best way to go about it is with a slight rework, so that players who use the Earth Wall as their primary source of damage can continue to do so, and will have more versatility by removing the requirement of while airborne, and then adding some small downsides to mobility so that players will be able to more easily close the gap and punish them. Stone Stance. In its current version, it doesn't offer a different playstyle at all, as most players who use this still opt for the range stasis Earth Wall playstyle. So a major rework is due. And I had some trouble thinking of solutions, so I went and interviewed some great Earth players and I came up with this. Let's remove all desire to combo this with Aerial by nerfing the damage drastically and buffing the Earth moveset in other areas by making the Earth armor no longer slow you, as that is the #1 reason as to why players don't use it. And of course, you wield the Earth, so you would want to stay on the ground, and with the grounded requirement, you will get a damage boost to a couple of underrated moves and a great buff to Earth Trap, as against skilled players it is difficult to hit, and now you will be rewarded even more. Now onto Water with Absolute Zero. And since the goal was to make ice moves stronger, we're going to do just that, by buffing the damage by 10% so that you get a 25% damage bonus, and we will couple that with a 50% range bonus to Snowstorm, as it's underused because of how inconsistent it is to deal damage. And for it being called a storm, it needs to look like it. Healing Blows. Currently this passive is terrible, as reducing overall damage will never be competitively viable, so a rework is due. And like Stone Stance, I had some trouble coming up with a new playstyle, but after doing some experiments, I came up with this. Let's buff the most underused attack in Water's move list, while also keeping the healing theme by gaining the ability to also heal allies. I feel as though this would change up the meta a lot for the better and make 3v3 tournaments more exciting, as this game is desperately lacking healing options. Now with the fire passives, and these are simple fixes, as the element isn't too complex. For Scorched Earth, a small nerf is in order, as Fire Blast has become a bit too oppressive, so I would keep the damage but lower the extra range by 15%. And for Burning Embrace, let's continue with the theme of long range poke by adding a small rework by buffing the current effect to deal 1 point of damage, and add some mobility downside so that players are able to close the distance and punish them. Now as I said in my previous video, I don't know much about air, so I'm going to leave the balancing to more knowledgeable players. But something has to give on aerial artistry, as players constantly being in the air with damage resistance is terrible design. Having to constantly look up to fight these people is extremely irritating, and when players use the argument of they're airbenders, of course they will be in the air, just makes no sense. That would be like saying it would be okay for waterbenders to be able to swim outside the map, or earthbenders to go underground. All elements should be on an equal playing field. Please rework that passive. Now that we have gone over how I would change the passives, let's look into the elements themselves, and honestly, the devs have done a pretty good job, as I believe each element only needs a couple of changes. But the number one thing that needs to happen is a rework to attack interactions. If you're confused, that basically means what attacks do when in contact with another attack. For example, if you shoot a fire bow and your arrow hits another arrow, they will both despawn. The reason I bring this up is currently the way attacks interact is terrible. For example, Air Blast can delete 90% of Fire's moveset, even though it only deals 1 point of damage. But I'm not going to hate on Air Blast anymore, as it's not just that. A Water Saw will despawn a fully charged fire arrow. Fire Laser instantly destroys charged fire bolts and can even detonate them in your hands. And there are so many more examples. My solution to this is simple. Design the interaction so that attacks can only break other attacks if they are equal or greater power at base level. No damage bonus should change the interactions. So a charged fire bow should go through a water saw and strike the player, and vice versa. A water saw should go through an air gust and strike the player. Assuming the attack interaction change happens, this is how I would balance each element, starting with Earth. Right now, Earth is the most balanced element, so the only changes I believe Earth needs is to remove the multi-hit feature on walls, as it's cheesy and doesn't make sense. And the last change would be to drastically increase the stamina usage for hammer throws. I believe stamina should start to take effect after 3 hammers. Other than that, I think Earth is fine. On to water. Now, like Earth, I think water is fine. It just needs a couple of changes, first one being Water Dagger. I believe the chip damage you get on sniping people should be removed, as it's very difficult for most elements to deal with, and this isn't very fun to fight, and also doesn't make for exciting gameplay. Next change is to Water Bubble. The spawning animation needs to change so that it's very apparent you have it, as skilled players will be able to attack with it before the animation has happened, so you're unable to see, making it very difficult to dodge. Third change is to Water Ring. I'm pretty sure it's being worked on, but just in case, the stamina usage needs to be drastically increased. And the final change is for Ice Shards, as it's a cool design but very weak, as the projectiles have bad range and speed, forcing you to get in close range, but at that point you have better options. So a simple range and speed buff would help these out a lot. That's it for water. Let's go to fire. And oh boy, does fire need some help. Let's start with Firebow. All this needs is a simple speed buff, making it easier to hit shots in the mid to long range, as it's very easy to dodge. Next change is for Heat. I believe with fire being so heavily reliant on charged attacks, it needs to be lowered by at least a second, to make it more in line with the rest of the element charge times. Make flamethrowers knockback drastically better so that they can be used for better mobility and a consistent option to recover, as fire has the worst recovery. Fix dagger slashes, increase the range to fire whips, and finally buff the damage and range to fire spear. Okay, I've been working on this video forever, so I'm done yapping. Feel free to debate me in the comments, and have a good one.